So this one says, the skilled way to administer true admonition. Admonishing others to help them reform their defects is important. It occurs with the heart of great compassion, and it is the first point in the life of service. But in the matter of admonishing or giving advice to others, one must take great pains. It is easy to find good and bad points in other people, and it is not difficult to speak about these to the person concerned. The majority of people think lightly about saying things that people do not like to hear and things that are difficult to say. Even if they do mention them, if their advice or admonition is not accepted, they just think that there is nothing they can do about it. But this sort of admonition is absolutely useless. It just brings shame upon the other person, like saying unkind things about him behind his back. It shows that one has only spoken up in order to clear one's own breast. If one truly wants to admonish someone, one must first distinguish very carefully whether the person is ready to accept the advice or not, and make sure that one is on sufficiently intimate terms with the person and has won the person's trust over a period of time. Then one must approach the matter from an angle that the person likes to talk about, and carefully think about one's manner of speaking in advance. One must also be careful about choosing the occasion for giving the admonition, such as in writing a letter or asking for leave. One can first begin by speaking about one's own errors or faults and plan the conversation so that the person will recall the matter you wish to raise without you bringing it up. Or one can begin by praising something that the person has done and thus try to put the person in a good mood. In this way, the person can be induced to accept one's advice as if he were drinking water to quench his own thirst. This is the true type of admonition that can induce people to really endeavor to correct their faults. When a number of colleagues have established a close relationship over time and are able to correct each other's faults, they can unite their minds to work together in one body in the service of their Lord. This is the true service, the true mind of great compassion. On the other hand, when one humiliates people with untactful criticism, how is it possible for them to correct their faults? God, that's so good. That's so good. Hold up. I got to do one thing though. I got to be honest with you guys. I was so worried that I have not been pronouncing admonition right. Let me look it up on Google real quick. That's been bothering the fuck out of me. Admonition. I just want to make sure I'm saying it right. Hold up.
Admonition.
Okay. I was like, oh yeah. I felt like I was saying it wrong, but I was like, okay, I got it. But if you don't know, admonition, the definition as I'm reading it here, an act or action of admonition, authoritative counsel or warning, reprimand, rebuke, reproof, reproach, basically you're letting someone know of their mistakes. It's criticism, right? It's criticism. And I love this so much because this is something that I've experienced myself, right? Because I was talking to a friend about it. And let me just give you the scenario. This happened between me and some of my friends, right? And so one of my friends, he has a younger brother, and he was telling me about how he was worried about his younger brother and the company he's been keeping, because he started hanging out with this guy who, basically he's a gangbanger, right? He's involved in like gang activity, and he knows that his younger brother really isn't about that life. Like there's no offense to him, but you're not a gangster, so why are you hanging out with gangbangers and shit? And so he's been trying to warn his brother about it, and I'm sure his mother has said the same thing. Like people around him have been telling him, like warning him about doing stuff like that, about keeping the wrong type of company. And so one day, me and him, we're hanging out because I'm friends with him too. And so the subject comes up about, again, him hanging out with these guys who are involved in gang activity. And so basically, I break it down to him step by step reason by reason why it's dangerous for him to be hanging out with these guys and why he needs to be careful. And so the whole time I'm doing it though, see, one thing about me is I'm good at communication because I've always understood, not always, but I have a good understanding of what this particular part is trying to tell you, as far as like how you critique people in such a way that they'll listen. And so the beautiful part about that conversation was that when it was all said and done, I remember he looked at me and he said, I guess that's what everybody been trying to tell me. And so what does that tell you? His brother, his mom, everybody around him was telling him what I was telling him, but they were not telling him the right way. They were doing so, again, I wasn't there, but I could imagine that the older brother, because I know how he is, he can be arrogant, he can be abrasive. And I've told him before, that type of communication style doesn't always work with everybody. Because the problem is, just like what this part says, when one humiliates people with untactful criticism, how is it possible for them to correct their fault? Now see, some people can't respond to that. You got to remember, everybody responds to different types of communication styles. The key is figuring out what type of communication style works with each individual. You have to, just like what Bruce Lee said, be like water, right? It doesn't just apply to fighting. It's also how you communicate. You can't communicate with everybody the same way. And knowing his older brother, I know that he has a more frank, abrasive communication style. That'll work with some people, but it doesn't work with his younger brother because his younger brother feels disrespected when people talk to him like that. But me, I can communicate with him and get the point across because I know how to tell him what he needs to hear without attacking his ego, without making him feel embarrassed or humiliated, right? It's really an art. It's really an art style. But at the same time, just to give you another example, let me just see. Let me see, just real quick. Yes, if one truly wants to admonish someone, one must first distinguish very carefully whether the person is ready to accept the advice or not. And so I have another friend. He's wrapped up in a toxic relationship right now. And so whenever he comes over, you know me, I'm Mr. Red Pill MGTOW. So I see his relationship, like, to me, I'm looking at it like it's a damn chess game. And I'm seeing all the moves and what he's been doing wrong and how she's been manipulating him. And so I've always tried to give him advice as far as how to navigate their relationship, where the obvious answer is to get out of it, you know. But at a certain point, I realized that it doesn't matter what I say, because my friend, he's not ready to receive the information. His mind might as well be on a different planet because he's not ready to receive the information that I'm giving him. I've been telling him these things for the longest time, and he acts like he's listening, but he never does what I tell him to do. He's never taken it to heart. You know, when he talks to me about his toxic relationship, he's really just venting his frustrations. But mentally, his mind is not ready to do what needs to be done to get out of the situation. And that's what I had to realize talking to him was, wait a minute, like at some point it clicked with me, like, I'm talking to him, but he might as well not even be here. His mind is not even ready to receive the information I'm giving him, right? So that's why I really love this part, because it talks about the importance of how you communicate with people, and even being able to discern whether or not the person you're trying to criticize is even receptive to your message. Sometimes it doesn't matter how you communicate. Some people just are not ready to receive the right message, because mentally they can't process it because they haven't matured. They're spiritually and mentally they haven't matured to see the light. So there's nothing you can do for people like that. So this one says, prepare down to the last detail. Lord Tsunetomo thought in the evening about each matter that he had to take care of the next day. When he had made a promise to go somewhere, on the evening before setting out, he would find out everything he could about the other party that he was going to meet with. And he would think carefully about every aspect of the meeting, from the words he would use in greeting to the season and the circumstances affecting the way he should speak to the other party. That is the way of harmony, the way of courtesy and etiquette. And it was funny because when I read this, it was funny because I used to always feel kind of embarrassed because I do stuff like that. Like, I plan out what I'm gonna say to people sometimes, like especially like when I know, like if I'm gonna ask for something or try to set something up with other people, I tend to do stuff like that. I tend to try to like plan exactly how I'm gonna say it or what I'm gonna say and shit like that. Like I remember, and it seems so silly, right? But just like a recent example, you guys know I work at a community center where I clean up, and I noticed that they got like this summer camp thing going on for kids, and they have like board games for the kids to play with. And I was looking around, I was like, man, these board games look boring as hell. Like I should go buy a board game that I think would be fun for the kids to play with and bring it to the community center and just ask the people who run the summer camp thing, like, would it be okay for me to donate, a new board game to their collection? And so I think I bought like a Spider-Man Monopoly or something like that. And it was funny because like I had a whole weekend to think about how I was gonna present this, and so I literally just kept going over in my head, not like over the whole weekend, but just several times throughout the weekend before I actually did it. I thought about exactly what I would say and how I would say it, and it seemed so simple because all I was doing was giving them a goddamn Spider-Man Monopoly board for the kids, and but I do stuff like that. I really do. Like if I know I'm going to be asking for something or presenting an idea to someone, I tend to go over in my head how I'm going to say it and what exactly I'm going to say. And I do that with all kinds of shit, right? But I used to feel kind of embarrassed about it because I thought maybe it was silly. But I can't lie. Like reading it here, I feel a bit validated. And now I feel more confident in it and able to stand on what I do because it does make sense. And it's not just about like preparing for what you're going to say to someone or how you're going to ask for something or whatever, or set something up. It can also apply to even like this podcast. Like I prepare before I do the podcast. I have a bit like, I don't prepare like every little detail, but I have a basic outline, right? I have the intro, the news, the OC, the main topic, key points, TOD, comments. Like I have a basic outline that I can fall back on when I'm actually recording it, So that's just, bit of wisdom. So the next one is, this is going to be nice. Let's see here. Manliness is in decline. I have heard that the late Matsuguma Kyonin said, in the way of medicine, male and female are assigned to yin and yang, and there is a corresponding difference in treatment. Even the pulse differs between men and women. Nevertheless, during the past 50 years, the pulse of men has become the same as that of women. Since I noticed this, I believe that in treating eye illnesses, it is appropriate to use the women's treatment to treat a man's eyes. It appears now the world has entered the latter days and the vital force of men has gone into decline, becoming just like that of women. Since this is something that I have apprehended through my own experience, I have kept it a secret. Regarding this, in observing men in recent years, I have seen many who seem truly to be of a feminine pulse, and those who appear to be indisputably male are rare. Nowadays, accordingly, if one exerts oneself just a bit, it is easy to pull ahead of others. Moreover, as evidence of the lack of courage in today's men, among men who have been executed by beheading, there are few cases where the head has actually been cut off, and even worse, kaishaku, who find excuses to avoid doing their job, are thought of as clever or as men with the cultivated spirit. This is the sort of age we live in. As another example, the game of running a sword between another man's thighs to test his courage was felt 40 or 50 years ago to be a test of manhood that every man had to go through. And because it was considered shameful to show one's thighs if they had no scars, young men would make scars on their thighs by themselves. All tasks that were called men's work were bloody jobs, but in our present age, those who engage in such jobs are called fools. People save appearances by their skillful use of words, but manage to avoid any kind of work that is even slightly demanding. This is something that I hope the young people of today will reflect upon. So obviously this is very interesting when you apply that to the age we live in now, especially in the West. I mean, this guy, he would have had a stroke. He would have had a stroke if he saw the men of today. Oh my God. And I mean, the most obvious example is when you look at the transgender movement, in particular the male to female transsexuals. But I think that's the more extreme, right? That's the more extreme example of it. I mean, even outside of that, you do see guys like we might call them like soy boys, onions, beta cucks and all that. And not just in behavior, but also in appearance. You got these guys who are just perpetually out of shape. They got arms the size of twigs and shit. I mean, just men who are weak mentally, physically, and emotionally. And certainly, I'm not the most masculine man in the world. I never would claim to be. But, I am someone who appreciates cultivating and developing his own masculinity. And, that's always a continued endeavor of mine. But at the same time, I don't really have anything against men who are more feminine, even like very overtly feminine, and not even like just in like a homosexual sense, right? Because we always, I think that unfortunately, but also reasonably, there's a perceived link between femininity and homosexuality. But even outside of that, even with just guys who are just more like, I guess you would say like passive or not overtly masculine, I think that to a certain degree, it can also be seen as an expression of one's true self as well. Because I think just because you're male doesn't necessarily mean that you're masculine by nature. I think that the same way you have feminine males, you have masculine women. You have women who are more masculine. And I think sometimes to a certain degree, it can be an expression of one's true self and true inclinations and whatnot. But also, I think the problem with that is that you have to admit that in order for men to even be allowed to not cultivate their own masculinity, to not be masculine, it shows that the era and the times that we're living in has to be softer, has to be less demanding, and I think that's why men being feminine is seen as such it's seen as being a much more troubling thing than women being masculine. Because if you look at it like this, right? Like if we were all, you take away the comforts and the luxuries of modern day living, and let's say we go back to living in like tribes and shit, like we in huts and villages, and we're constantly at war with each other. As a tribe, you can't afford for your males to embrace femininity. Your males have to embrace an extreme version of masculinity in order for your tribe to survive. You know, men being able to embrace femininity and express femininity is quite simply, it's a luxury of living in times of peace, because in times of war, you simply can't do things like that. And I think that's why society really has such a disdain for feminine and weak males, because I think it might be, maybe it's just so deeply rooted in our consciousness and understanding that men need to be men. Men need to be masculine in order to protect and uphold the structure of the tribe, of the community, of our society. But I'm just saying, me personally, I don't really have anything against guys being feminine. I just think that it's a luxury of living in times of peace, because if we lived in times of constant conflict and war, one, your environment would have naturally molded you into being something more masculine, and inevitably. And not only that, you wouldn't have been able to really find a place in society, or rather, it would have been much harder for you to find a place in society as a feminine male, because during times of war and times of conflict, the masculine male is going to be the most revered, is going to be the most sought after and pedestalized. But I just think that this is men being more weak and feminine is almost like an inevitable consequence of fighting your way into times of peace and luxury. Okay. Something for. Let me get a sip of water. If one asks of one's heart, how will it reply? There is nothing quite as precious as the second line of a certain tanka, which goes, if one asks of one's heart, how will it reply? Perhaps one should repeat this always in one's mind, like the Nimbutsu. First, it is often heard on the lips of people, those in recent times who are said to be clever do nothing but use their wisdom to adorn appearances and deceive people. Thus, they are worse than the dull-witted. At least the dull-witted are straight. If one looks thoroughly into one's heart, as the poem suggests, there will be no more hidden places. One can be one's own best interrogator. I would like to have a heart that has nothing to be ashamed about when it meets the interrogator. I like that one too. You know, one thing I do, and one thing that I always prioritize, is self-honesty. You know, I always try to look as deeply into my emotions and my feelings and my heart, my mind. I always try to get into the depths of who I am in regards to every subject. That's why I spend a lot of time reflecting and thinking about things. You know, sometimes I go outside and I just sit and I just go over like my beliefs on different subjects, and it's, you know, just express myself to myself. And it's something that I practice quite a bit. And one thing I always make sure of is that when I do it, it's like I almost imagine that I'm talking to God, you know. Even though I'm not religious, I feel like that's the best way for me to get the most truth out of myself. Because sometimes I feel like sometimes I'll be talking, but I'm talking as if I'm talking to a specific person or in a specific situation. And you know, when you're talking to people, there tends to be a filter. When you're talking in public and you're in different situations, there tends to be a filter. With God, there is no filter, because you can't hide anything that you feel or think from God. And so when I really reflect and when I really go deep into myself, as far as trying to get the truth out of myself, I just always imagine that like my heart, my soul, everything is out in the open, just completely wide open for God to see, because God would see that regardless. And so that's how I get the most out of myself, as far as like trying to get the truth of how I feel about different things going on in my life, or different situations that I've been in. But yeah, I think it's a very good thing to practice, more or less. As it says, to be your own interrogator. To like, when you really open your heart up to yourself, what do you see? And do you see everything clearly? Are you 100% honest with yourself? Between the good and the bad that you may have done or whatnot. So this one says, there is always room for improvement. An elderly swordsman said, one's whole life of practice follows a certain order. The lowest grade is where, although one practices, one does not really achieve anything. Oh, hold up. One does not really achieve anything and thinks that both oneself and others are clumsy and unskilled. In this condition, one cannot be of any use. The middle grade is where, although one is still of no use, one is aware of one's insufficiencies and also able to see the insufficiencies of others. The upper grade is where one has thoroughly understood with regard to one's own practice and takes pride in one's proficiency, enjoying the praise of others and lamenting the lack of proficiency in others. At this stage, one will be of use. The next higher grade is where one appears as if one doesn't know and sees others also as proficient. This is the highest stage that most people reach, but there is an even higher level that surpasses that. If one enters deeply into this higher way, one finally finds that it is something without end. So one no longer thinks that one has mastered the art. Since one now sees clearly that one still has insufficiencies, one is no longer satisfied regarding one's lifetime accomplishments. One does not feel vain, nor does one feel self-abasing. I understand that Lord Yagu Taijamanakami Moninori said, I do not know the way to win over other people. I only know the way to win over myself. Today my skill is better than yesterday, and tomorrow it will be better than today. And I will continue to improve for my whole life. This is also what is called having no end. So I think this one is kind of self-explanatory. You can always get better. That it's at some point on your journey, at some point you become wise enough to realize that perfection for us humans is basically impossible. The highest aim, therefore, is not to necessarily to master something, but I think to consistently work at being as good as you possibly can be. That's the highest level, is understanding that it's a never ending journey. You can always get better. You can always improve. Although, there are certain like limitations. For example, if you look at basketball, for example, at some point, as good as Michael Jordan was, he had to retire, at which point he could no longer, technically he could no longer improve because his body simply reached a certain limit where he would no longer improve, only decline. So at that point, your only option is to, switch gears a little bit. That's why you see a lot of athletes, right? If you're a basketball player, once you're no longer in your prime and your body has declined, you might become a coach, because that way you can still stay within the realm of your the artistic endeavor of your choosing, while also having room for improvement, right? You can no longer improve as a player because you've reached your ceiling because of your body's limitations. So you can adjust by becoming a coach or becoming a GM or something of that nature, right? You can stay within the realm of your art of your career path. You just got to take a different approach, right? But other than that, perfection is simply unachievable. You can always get better, and if you can't get better, then you just change your approach and get better at a different in a different area in the same field so to speak, you know.